Hello, welcome. We are welcome to our current affairs program where we've been discussing the presidential elections petitions tribunal. If you've missed the first episode of this program, go ahead and watch it. We talked about most of the matters arising from that petition. And we're back again with our conversation right here with LG Jamala Esquire, a private legal practitioner and also the head of department, Paralegal Studies, Eastern Polytechnic here in River State. And he and I, we've been talking and trying to dissect some of the issues arising from the judgment delivered last week from the Presidential Elections Petitions Tribunal. And let's get into those conversations again as we look at some of the questions raised. And this time around, let's go into one of the issues that was raised, and that is the qualification of Peter Obi as Labour Party member prior to his candidature as the presidential candidate of that Labour Party. So that matter too came up at the tribunal, and a lot of people are wondering, what was that about? What's your take?
When the Labour Party and P2B lost the election, instituted a petition against the winner and his political party. Tinubu and his APC also filed what they call a preliminary objection challenging the competence, the status, the local standard of P2B on the grounds that he was not qualified to contest the election ab initio. Their understanding to the fact that elections are run under a political party platform for you to contest any position, that political party must indeed sponsor you. And so they contended that prior to the primaries of the Labour Party, P2B was a full member of the PDP and defected about 3 days later. He was made the candidate of the Labour Party. And so in their own thinking, they felt it was against the provisions of the Labour Party law. Most of the political parties have what they call the period within which you stay in a political party before you begin to reap from the benefits, the rights that accrue members of the political party. In the APC and PDP, being the main two political parties in Nigeria, I'm aware in their various constitutions that before you can come out to contest for any political office in Nigeria, you must have been a member of the party for a period not less than 2 years, and that you are also a financially committed member of the party. Now, that provision is subject to another article of their own constitution that says the national executive of the party has a right to give what they call waiver. So that's why you can see someone entering a political party today. Tomorrow you see the national party has waived some provisions of the constitution. It has to do with qualification to contest and vie for. That was what happened in the case of Obi. Now, the Court of Appeal, sitting as a court of tribunal, first for the presidential election, said that particular issue was a family affair, and that PDP was only, APC was just a mere busybody trying to poke nose into an affairs of a family that has nothing to do with them. Now, there are several cases to that effect. And again, I salute the reasoning of our Lordship in holding that ground, that the issue as to whether or not P2B qualified or has a local standard to bring in the petition was a domestic affair of the Labour Party, and therefore PDP cannot question it. In River State, it happened, even in this 2023 election, where River State PDP took virtually all the political parties to court on the grounds that some of them, they alleged that their primaries were not conducted in line with the provisions of the Electoral Act. Although, sadly, the first two decisions that came from the Federal High Court, Port Harcourt Division, were to the fact that PDP has the legal standard. The courts shutting its eyes against the several decisions of the court up to Supreme Court that said the contrary and gave judgment to PDP, disqualifying some candidates of the APC and some of other political parties. But when the matter got to the Court of Appeal, on the sole ground that it was a domestic affair, and the PDP cannot interfere in how a political party different from theirs handled its activities, the court struck out those cases on the grounds of local standard. And so that was a reinforcement of the provisions of the law, the various laws of various cases.
Political parties.
Various cases that the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeal have never, I think they've never wavered in that that line of thinking, that the political parties affair remains internal to them and them alone, and therefore an outsider cannot even question. Now, the Electoral Act has even reduced the number of persons that can even question a qualification of a candidate. Now, if we are to conduct a congress or a primaries in my own political party, and you are not part of those who bought form, participated in the process of the primaries, you cannot even challenge the process that led to my emergence. So for you, although you are a member of the political party, but if you did not partake in the process that led to my emergence, you cannot question. So the local standard have been reduced to only those who participated in the process.
Wow, interesting. All right, that brings me to the issue between the Allied People's Movement against Shettima, that's the vice presidential candidate of the APC. Well, that matter was at the tribunal against Shettima. You know, they were contesting his, his qualification of being picked as the vice presidential candidate of the APC. And that matter too was struck out. Let's hear your own take concerning that.
You know, prior to the nomination of Shettima as the vice presidential candidate of the APC, there was this debate or these stories that was trending on social media, what they call the placeholder. Now, prior to the Tinubu settling for Shettima, there was, when it was time for them to submit names to INEC, there was a particular person that they kept there. They were not sure the person would be the, what they call it, the vice president. Now, if you go to the Electoral Act, the Electoral Act talks about persons who are vying for positions. Now, a vice presidential candidate is like a spare tire relaxing at the boot. So long as the spare tire, so long as the main four wheels are still active, even if it takes 50 years, the relevance of that spare tire can never be called to play. So the position of a vice president is like that of a spare tire. Now, the laws make this specific, those vying for. Vice is not vying for any position. It's the prerogative of the person who has been elected the candidate of a political party to pick his vice president. So the procedure for bringing out a vice is silent in the Constitution and also silent in the Electoral Act. Silent in the sense that you need not pass through primaries to become a vice president. But you need pass through internal primaries of a political party in line with the provisions of the Electoral Act and INEC guidelines for you to emerge a candidate of the political party, be it House of Assembly, be it House of Rep, be it Senator, be it Governor and President. Now, the contention of the APM that as at the time Shettima was nominated, that he was holding a position for the senatorial district of his own district, and therefore he was nominated he was nominated on twice, that is contrary to the provisions of the Electoral Act. I think, again, from my little understanding, that they overshot their understanding by placing that to be a double nomination. Now, when Shettima got hint of his possible approval to be the vice president, he resigned voluntarily from the senatorial district he was to represent, for which he passed through a primary. Now, their own contention and reasoning that since he resigned, that there was supposed to be another primaries to conduct to bring in Shettima as a vice. But remember, the Electoral Act talks about just the president. Now, there are two grounds for substitution of a candidate who has an emerge. For the president, any candidate must be by voluntary resignation. That voluntary resignation will be sent to the party, and the party will now send that resignation to INEC. The second ground is by death. Now, where the second grounds occur by death, the law says INEC will give that political party 14 days within which to conduct a primary to replace the deceased. It is not for the vice president. So when the vice presidential candidate that was submitted to INEC under APC voluntarily resigned and relinquished its position, the space was vacant, was open, and it was within the time frame allowed by law and INEC guidelines for a political party that intends to make substitution to so do. And so Shettima, having withdrawn from the senatorial race, was replaced. And so the thinking that the party ought to have conducted the primaries to bring in Shettima was, to me, contrary to the intent and spirit of the law.
In other words, that election, that internal primary election they were looking for does not apply in the case of Shettima.
No, it was not. It's the spirit, the understanding of the Electoral Act. Let's give it the literal meaning in this circumstance. As nothing, we need not import. The understanding is clear. Primaries are to be conducted for principal persons who are vying for particular positions, not a spare tire.
Interesting. All right, I'm going to go into more questions, but let's take a quick break. Once we come back, we'll continue with our conversation.
Hey there, are you looking to record your videos, do your voiceovers, and take your professional pictures? Look no further. With our state-of-the-art newsroom, photography, kitchen for our food content creators, and exclusive children's studio, we certainly can deliver the best studio experience. Our carefully designed studio space can bring your diverse creative content ideas to life. We aim to consistently serve value to our customers far and wide. Come, let Tharv Media give life to your dreams. Tharv Media, a slice of infotainment.
All right, welcome back from that very short break. We're still discussing the Presidential Elections Petitions Tribunal, the judgment, and we've been talking about matters arising from that judgment. And I'm still with LG Jamala Esquire, and we've been having a lot of interesting revelations coming out of some of his wonderful analysis as regards the judgment. All right, let's get into some more matches concerning these electoral laws. And then this time I'm going to the BVAS. So there's been the question of INEC was given over 355 billion or so to conduct this election, and of which most of that money was spent on, acquiring technology to make our electoral processes very easy and trustworthy. But unfortunately, the judgment of the court has somehow made the BVAS somehow irrelevant as to the way people are looking at it now. That what is the place of the BVAS if some of what the judges have said has made it look as though the BVAS was not even necessary in the whole electoral process. Do you agree with them?
I will hold a contrary view to the understanding of our Lord Justices. First, let me state it here that we are not sitting on appeal on the decision of the tribunal, because we do not have that powers to sit on appeal. It is a judgment has been given, so it is no longer subjudice where we cannot make comment on it. So we are, to the extent that we only critiquing the judgment, so we are not sitting on appeal. Appeal lies with the Supreme Court.
Sure.
That having been said, I think I have a right to disagree on some issues, and I also have the right to agree whether some of the issues raised in law are valid. In my own understanding, though limited, I think looking at the justices over there, they have spent some reasonable number of years both at the bar and at the bench. Now, the issue of BVAS is a product of the amendments of the Electoral Act. Now, also the amendment of the Constitution, if I'm not mistaken, 4th or 5th alteration of the Constitution. From 1999 till date, this unbroken democracy, every election year calls for probing into the existing Electoral Act, whether our laws are good enough to give us that ideal election that democracy looked at as emanating from a collective will of the masses. Leaders coming out of a product of the voluntary surrendering of the freedom of the masses to an individual to preside over their affairs. And so we question once election is conducted, we probe, we look into the law. There's always a need to tinker with the existing law. And from 1999, we have tinkered with our electoral act, tinkered with our constitution. And in 2002, rather than tinkering, they brought 2022, sorry, they brought in a new electoral act, made some innovations, thinking that if we are to comply with the spirit intent of the electoral act, that we will have what we call the heavenly election in Nigeria. Now, there was this debate prior the enactment or the assenting of the electoral act, whether Nigeria was ripe for what we call electronic voting and electronic transmission of results. I was one of those who said, although it is, it should be advocated, but I think Nigeria is not ripe for electronic transmission of results. My understanding then was to the fact that virtually everything we do technological-wise, we are relying on some foreign involvement. We cannot independently handle our technological space in Nigeria. There's going to be an influence. If you look at the case of Obama and, Biden and what is the past president of the US, who is now standing trial. He talks about external influence in the electoral process. Now, if it's a country like America could be threatened that Russia influenced or tampered with their process, talk more of Nigeria, who is a fourth developing country. That having said, the Electoral Act, if you look at INEC as a body is a creation of the Constitution. Now, in the Constitution, by Section 4, the National Assembly is to make laws for the general administration of the country with regards to federal authorities. Now, in exercising that power, the National Assembly created or enacted the Electoral Act 2022. Now, in the Electoral Act 2022, there was this debate as to whether we should rely on manual transmission of results or we should go with electronica. And it was made a provision that INEC should be given the leverage to decide what best fits as the occasion may call for. And so, but it was overruled for manual accreditation. The Electoral Act abolishes manual accreditation. So it was left for transmission, collation and transmission of results. So collation is still done manually, but transmission was to be used was to be done electronically on a process to be determined by INEC. That's why if you go to Section 65, Section 60, subsection 5 of the Electoral Act, where election has been conducted, the work of the presiding officer is to transfer the results, including the total number of the scores, in a manner to be prescribed by the Independent Electoral Commission. Now, the Electoral Act gave INEC the powers to create its own rules for its governance. Now, it is from that powers that the INEC, for the 2023 election, brought out what they call 2023 Guidelines for Conduct of Election, both presidential and House of Assembly. Now, in several paragraphs, where they brought in beavers, they stated the functions of the beavers to be one, capturing and authenticating that the holder of the PVC, what you call the permanent voter's card, is the true owner of that PVC. That is for the initial process. But once voting is done, the second function of the beavers is that the presiding officer will take a picture photograph of the result
with the beavers
having been signed by political parties and their agents. And the officer himself will take a photo shot of that result and upload to what they call IREV, INEC Results Electronic Viewing Portal. That is a function of the beavers. And it was stated clearly mandatory in law when the phrase shall is used. It is mandatory. It requires no discretionary function. And that is why INEC spokesman and in charge of education, Festus Okoye, and even the chairman, in several platforms, relying on those innovations, gave the masses the assurances that the commission has no discretionary powers not to transmit a result. Even when Mahmoud went to Chatham House, he relied on those provisions and said that transmission of the result to the IREF is mandatory.
Yeah.
Now, the only excuse that INEC gave was that they had glitches when it comes to that of the presidential election. Because for others, they were transmitting same and on real time. But when it comes to that of the presidential election, they said they had glitches, and therefore they resorted to using the local way of transmitting results.
Right.
Now, for the court to hold that BVAS is, for the court to hold that INEC has a discretionary power not to transmit results, to my mind and to my own thinking, is against the provisions of INEC. But the truth be told, I've gone through the judgment. I have not seen where the court made references to the guidelines of INEC. Because if the court had made references to the provisions of the guidelines of INEC, you would have seen that INEC regulations, being a quasi-legislature, is also binding on INEC and parties insofar as those provisions are not contrary to the provisions of the Electoral Act. Now, some persons have argued that INEC regulations cannot override the Constitution. I agree. And they have made mention the case of Dakuku Peter Side and Nyesom Wike in 2015, where although the Supreme Court declared that, yes, that election was, Rivers State was a theater of war, but that because the card reader was unknown to the Electoral Act 2010, was also unknown to our Constitution, that the regulation of INEC introducing the card reader for the election was strange, and therefore incident form, which was known to both the Electoral Act and the Constitution, takes precedence over the Electoral Act, over the card reader, and therefore said that regulation, to the extent that it was contrary to the provisions of the Electoral Act and the Constitution, was void. Now, placing that authority on the present day, they are not in all force, because the Electoral Act has introduced electronic transmission of results. The Constitution has been giving INEC the leeway to make direction, to make regulations, to guide itself. And if INEC, in turn, has made those regulations are binding on both INEC, binding on parties themselves. That is why in several cases you see where a political party in Zamfara State, for instance, in 2019, it was a guideline of INEC that said you are to submit your candidates within a required number of days. And now when PDP APC having some issues with their internal parties, they failed to submit the names of their candidates within the required number of days. And the court held that, yes, it was against the guidelines of INEC, but not the Constitution. But the INEC guidelines drew its source, its powers from the Constitution.
Yeah, interesting analysis there as regards the importance of the BVAS. And, you know, well, the question is still there in the minds of Nigerians, though. If the court has ruled against, or the judgment has come in the way it has, a lot of people are wondering why the BVAS was even introduced in the first place, if some of those results that were presented in courts didn't make any...
let's remember, this is just court of first instance. So I think we are most likely to have, for us, within 60 days, start going. The Supreme Court has within 60 days to give its own final judgment.
That's true.
And so we want to see what the Supreme Court will hold of the use of BVAS in the electoral processes. Because if it goes this way, then the essence of the BVAS and the money, the huge sums of money used in conducting the election to me is a waste.
It's a waste.
It's a waste.
Exactly. Since we're still in the line of talking about, electoral laws, the INEC guidelines, let's look at the, look at this question regarding the judgment delivered. Do you think the electoral law covered every aspect as regards this matter?
First, let me say this: a law can never be perfect. Law itself is a response to the changes of the society. Law is modified. Law is tinkered with to reflect the changes of the society. Now, when if I'm not mistaken, 2016 or so, when this man, what's his name, Kogi State, there was a particular man who contested an election. He was already at the verge of being declared a winner, but for few issues, some local governments were declared inconclusive. Now, if you look at that, even the margin is very slim, so the victory was sure, and the man died. Now, the issue that came up that time was whether his deputy can automatically come forth to represent, to take up the candidature of the political party. Now, the Electoral Act and the Constitution was silent on that.
Yeah.
On that kind of happening. So it was the modification, the amendment of the Electoral Act and the Constitution, bearing in mind what happened in Kogi State, that made provisions to handle scenarios like this, if peradventure it happens. Let's go back to Yar'Adua's case, where Yar'Adua was somehow seen to be incapacitated, but he did not transmit powers, hand over powers to Goodluck, vice president.
For months.
Yes, for months. And now, the persons handling him then felt he was still alive, and therefore there was no need to transmit powers. But practically speaking, the man was more or less a vegetable that cannot act in the functions of his office. And now, it is the Constitution again, the happening of that Yar'Adua scenario, that made modifications to handle situations that we are all human. Our makers, the lawmakers are human, and therefore most times they do not see the tomorrow. And therefore, so you cannot say a law will contain everything that will serve a lifetime of a particular country. No. Law is made to reflect the present realities and peradventure forecast. You can only forecast as far as your eyes can see. And so if there are events that will happen that your eyes maybe never advise your mind to those areas, then modifications can come in. But truthfully, looking at the Electoral Act 2022, although it has its own shortcomings, but if we are to obey the provisions of the Electoral Act, its schedule, and we have the right men to conduct these affairs, men of integrity. I think our laws are good enough at present to deliver to us what we all yearn for. The problem we are having in Nigeria is that we do not have the men with the strong will, the men with the independent power, independent mind to conduct the activities of the election in line with the provisions of the Electoral Act.
All right, thank you so much, Jamal Esquire. Yeah, he's been giving us a lot of interpretation to some of the confusions as regards the judgments from the Presidential Elections Petitions Tribunal. All right, we're going to take a very quick break right now. Once we come back, we'll round up this show. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back, and want to thank you so much for watching up to this time. Don't forget to subscribe so that you can also be a part of the program and drop your contributions on the comment section. And of course, follow us on all our social media platforms. All right, I'm still with Jamal Esquire, and let's go back to the very final questions for today. We've talked a lot about some of these matters, and that would be your advice to all the parties involved in this whole, tribunal, both the councils, the judges, some of the areas that you thought could have been handled better. What's your advice to, everybody involved?
Let me state here, I think I lack the capacity to advise. You've seen the list of senior lawyers.
Yes,
over 100 of them.
Yeah.
For the APC, and also senior lawyers, notable professionals all election petition experts. If you look at the team, they all a gathering of the best election petition-wise is concerned in Nigeria. So first, I will admit I like the capacity to advise them professionally because what they say, what a child sits seeing, stands seeing, and an elderly man will sit down and see even far beyond what his child is seeing. That being said, if I were to be in the team and to think differently, my only problem is that INEC, being an institution of government, really not helped in seeing how we can resolve election petitions quietly early. Then two, the time frame within which to file an election petition is also a discouraging factor to a petitioner. The
21 days.
21 days is a short because there are some certain materials that most times the INEC refuse to provide.
Yeah, we saw that in this case.
It takes an order of court. We did some petitions in Rivers State, even with the order of the tribunal asking that those documents be released to the petitioner up to date. They refuse to release those material. So how do you now act in vacuum? If you are not equipped with the necessary information, if you're not equipped with the necessary materials, you can exercise the right to go to court. Is there, but there are some rights that you exercise in futility. So even if the right is there, some persons will opt not to proceed because to be an exercise. So first, I think going further, if the Electoral Act is to be tinkered with, the number of days and the Constitution, because it's a product of the Constitution, if they are to be tinkered with going forward in 2027, the number of days within which to bring an election petition should be increased to, if possible, 30 days. Within that period, the tribunal can give an order. And also, when an order of court is given for an institution of government to release some vital materials to a petitioner, it should be made mandatory, and that failure which to do so, the person in charge should be need no further criminal proceedings to jail him or to make him comply with the decisions of court. I think by so doing, INEC will, rather than taking side, will now be on the fence to act for both parties. So INEC as an institution need not taking side with the winner in most cases.
Because it looks as though that's what happened.
Yes, most times INEC takes sides with the winner, or where their preferred winner was rejected by the masses, you see them taking side with the loser in order to reclaim the mandate,
the trust of the
for their own candidate.
That's
why if you file an election petition, you see that the respondent always have all the documents is required to present his case, but the petitioner is lacking.
And struggles a lot.
And struggles to meet up to see if he can get it. So that's the biasness on the side of the institution of government. I think on that being said, generally, it is a right of Atiku Abubakar, it is right of P2B to approach the Supreme Court and their own political parties. I believe, speaking professionally, I believe there are some legal issues that the Supreme Court need to give the final decision on it, so that we do not act on conflicting reasonings of the Court of Appeal. Because we need to have a direction. Like the issue of beavers, the issue of the FCT, let's have a clear understanding of whether it is right, it is wrong. The Supreme Court is final. And anyone who is aggrieved can only appeal to God, and that will be after your death. And I do not think we should be left speculating. They should exercise their right. Whatever comes out of it, life continues.
Interesting. All right, I want to thank you so much, Barrister Jamala, for coming through. Thank you. You've done a great job interpreting most of this, confusion for a lot of Nigerians. I'm sure it is clear. Even to me, I've learned quite a lot. Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Let me thank TAF TV for giving me the opportunity to air my limited knowledge on electoral jurisprudence in Nigeria. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And to our viewers, I hope you've learned quite a lot like I have. And don't forget that you're also part of this, so drop your contributions and your commentaries on the comment section. We'd love to hear what you think about all we've been discussing here on the program. All right, until next time, I see you again. My name is Williams Abule, and it's been a nice time with you.